The best of bedotia. You don't need many Madagascar rainbows to start your own shoal, writes Gabor Horvath. Here's how you could breed this beautiful and bubbly species. Mention a rainbow fish, and most people will think of the colourful Melanotania species from Australia and the nearby isles. Meanwhile, many aquarists don't even know that there is a closely related genus living in the waters of Madagascar. It's hard to find an aquatic store without at least one aquarium full of various Melanotania, and in many unfortunate cases they are hybrids, but you need to search a bit longer to spot a bedotia. That's why when I recently stumbled upon 3 juvenile Madagascar rainbow fish, Bedotia madagascarensis, I purchased them after only the shortest hesitation, and the only reason I hesitated at all was because rainbows are shoaling fish that fare better in numbers. But then I brooded on my fond memories of keeping Bedotia over the decades, and the trio came home with me. Not the fish you think. Let me take a small taxonomic detour. Some readers who know a little about rainbows might be confused about the name. Why Bedotia madagascarensis and not Bedotia guiei? For a long time, Madagascar rainbow fish were indeed sold, and sometimes are still sold, as Bedotia guiei. This was the name I got to know them as many years ago. And while there is actually a fish called B. guiei living in Madagascar, it's not the only Bedotia making its way into the hobby. While there are similarities between B. guiei and B. madagascarensis, probably the most confusing is the red tail coloration of the males of both species. But there are more than enough obvious differences to tell them apart. True B. guiei have a glassy translucent part to the tail, with red bordering around the caudal spot, while the tail pattern of B. madagascarensis always includes a white or golden coloured middle section with a black border. There are a few other members of the Bedotia family inhabiting the waters of Madagascar, but with the exception of B. madagascarensis, they're rarely imported, if at all. It would be great if some of the other species would become selectively available in the hobby, and not just for their attractiveness. There are some really interesting fish among the Bedotia, and virtually all are in danger of extinction. Agriculture and deforestation lead to significant habitat loss, and even in the remaining areas, the endemic species are outcompeted or outright eaten by introduced invasive species such as tilapia, Easter mosquito fish, Gambiosa holbrooki, and snakehead, Channa spp. For many Madagascar species, not only for the Bedotia, captive breeding could be their only hope for survival. Growing on. My fish were barely 4 centimetres when purchased, so I temporarily put them in a 90 centimetre growing tank, with the intention to move them later to a large display aquarium. One of them had red on the caudal fin, and the other 2 had white-edged tails. Based on my earlier experiences, I was confident that this meant I had a male and 2 females. One of the suspected females grew much quicker than the other, and soon began to dominate the tank, chasing its siblings, and especially the male. Likely due to the bullying, the little male decided to jump ship and ended up dried out on the floor. The remaining 2 developed well on a varied diet of frozen food, live mosquito larvae, and a range of quality dry foods, and in a few weeks they were ready to be introduced into the large community tank. During this time, the largest rainbow went through an interesting transformation, to an extent that for a while I thought it was a different but related Bedotia. It developed large, blue, sparkling scales on its side, as opposed to the usual golden ones, while its caudal fin turned almost full black, with just a hint of white around the tips. The dorsal and anal fins looked majestic, with a golden-orange base and wide black edges. After a quick bit of research and asking rainbow fish experts, it was confirmed that my fish is a colour variant of the Madagascar rainbow fish. I learnt that with B. madagascarensis being polymorphic, occurring in 2 or more forms, there are several colour forms living together in the wild. Some of the males, just like mine, have no red colours on the caudal fins at all. This was all news to me, as I always thought that the red colour was a telltale sign of gender. Did you know? Not one species in the Bedotia genus reaches a maximum length of over 10 centimetres fully grown. The accidental spawn. Despite learning this new fact, I was still dubious about the sexes until one day I decided to revamp the display tank. I took out some overgrown anubias plants and moved them temporarily to a fry tank with a group of 2-week-old golden Barboides semifascillatus juveniles. After a fortnight, I spotted a few different-looking fry among the barbs. The strangers looked like tiny silver arrows whizzing around the tank at a speed as compared to the laid-back barbs, they were more slender and more active. I had a closer look with my magnifying glass, and to my great surprise, I identified them as rainbow fish fry. They must have gotten there as eggs attached to the roots of the anubias, but it was proof that I had a real pair in the big tank. I followed the fry development closely, taking pictures and notes. The offspring grew quickly, reaching 4 centimeters in less than 3 months. I managed to raise all 4 fry. There was a male among the youngsters, red tail when young, but switched to black tail later, and 3 females. After they joined their parents, I cleaned out their growing tank, moving some Java moss from there into a shrimp tank. History repeated itself, and in 2 weeks' time I had 4 tiny little silver arrows swimming in the shrimp tank. It shows that Madagascar rainbows are sexually mature at a relatively young age, as my fish were barely 5 centimeters long when they spawned. Interestingly, all 4 of the second batch became males with red tails, despite their father and grandfathers being both black-tailed. This leads me to wonder if any future offspring of these males will show a black tail again. I won't have to wait long for the answer, as they're reaching maturity soon. Happy rainbows. If you want to keep the poor man's rainbow fish, as some people erroneously refer to as bedotia, you have an easy task. They're undemanding and adaptable, so as long as the basics are covered, you'll be fine. As they can reach over 10 centimeters when fully grown, a long, over 120 centimeter aquarium is a must. In the wild, they inhabit slow but oxygen-rich streams with very soft water. If you have wild-caught fish, you should target soft and acidic conditions, but the vast majority of available Madagascar rainbows are commercially bred and less demanding. An aquarium filled with soft to medium-hard 0 to 12H and slightly acidic to neutral 5.5 to 7.5 pH water is perfect for them. The temperature should be somewhere between 22 to 26 degrees Celsius. They look quite washed out in strong lighting, but if you add some surface vegetation, such as water lettuce, piscia, your fish will sparkle. Decoration-wise, you can go with just roots, leaf litter, and floating plants, but they would feel equally at home and look regal in a densely planted aquarium. Efficient filtration is a must, and even though the perfect torpedo-shape typical of riverine fish would suggest otherwise, a strong flow isn't exactly necessary. Madagascar rainbows are very active swimmers and also talented jumpers, so make sure that the tank is well covered, and while they're not exactly timid, overly boisterous tank mates should be avoided. Having said that, they can hold themselves up quite well, even against large fish. Fact file. The Madagascar rainbow fish. Scientific name, Bedotia madagascarensis. Pronunciation, Bedotia madagascarensis. Size, to 10 centimeters. Origin, endemic to eastern Madagascar. Habitat, clear, slow-flowing streams with heavy marginal vegetation. Tank size, 120 by 30 by 30 centimeters. Water requirements. Soft and acidic to slightly alkaline water, 5.5 to 7.5 pH, 0 to 12H. Temperature. Peaceful community species. Sometimes a male may flare, but it is unable to cause damage. Feeding. Wholly unfussy. Offer flakes, pellets, live and frozen daphnia or bloodworm. Availability and cost. Not rare, but not exactly common either, so you may need to shop around. Prices from about £5 each. For example, in a suitably large biosoap tank, they could easily be matched with Paratilapia polleni and used as a dither fish. In my experience, older rainbow fish males can be a bit bullish, especially with similarly shaped fish, and my dominant male always flares up when a torpedo barb, Saedria denisonii, passes by. Aside that, they're peaceful, and if you have 8 or 10 of them, you'll have a lively community with plenty of interactions. The males will chase the females and the rival males around, but squabbles are usually harmless and won't result in any injuries. Feeding them is no issue, as they happily gobble up anything edible that falls into the water. Having said that, a varied diet, including live and frozen foods besides staple dry goods, using high-quality ingredients, goes a long way to keeping them in top condition. Making babies. Well-fed and well-kept fish will spawn on a regular basis, even in community tanks, but the free caviar is usually quickly consumed by the tank mates. In a very densely planted tank with plenty of surface vegetation, you may find survivors, but for breeding purposes, a separate aquarium should be prepared. My preferred choice is a relatively large and bare tank of at least 60 centimeters long with a large sponge filter. I find the best temperature for breeding to be around 26 degrees Celsius, as it stimulates spawning without jeopardizing the oxygen content of the water. Warmer water will hold less oxygen than cool. In the wild, Madagascar rainbows lay their eggs on the roots of marginal plants, so I use a DIY floating spawning mop, which reaches down to the bottom. Before attempting breeding, the males and the females are separated for a fortnight and given extra quality food for conditioning them. Depending on the number of fry required, either a single pair or a male plus a few females are then placed into the breeding aquarium. After 2 weeks separation, the partners are usually very keen to spawn. Keep an eye on the male, though, as it could be overly eager in the confined space of the breeding tank. And in the confined space of the breeding tank, the females could be stressed. But if everything goes well, you can expect to see rainbow fish eggs appearing on the mop within a day or 2. Bedotia lay only a few eggs daily, and as well-fed parents usually don't consume them, you can leave the mop in for up to a week, later moving either the mop or the parents to another tank. Hatching takes 7 to 10 days depending on temperature, and the tiny fry remain close to the water's surface, hunting for their first food. I use Sierra Micron to start them off, but within a few days they will be able to consume newly hatched Artemia norpali. Soon, your tank will be full of life, with fry at different stages of development. As some of them grow much quicker than others, it's advisable to separate the fry based on sizes. If you want to, you could easily sex them from around 1 centimeter body length, as the young males will show red tail and fin colours even at this early stage, though later they may switch to a full black tail. Just keep up with the regular water changes, and within 4 months the youngsters will be large enough to join their parents. In the wild, they'll usually form loose schools of around a dozen fish in size. If you have several generations swimming in the same large aquarium, you can also observe each generation forming its own school. Watching these interactions within and between these schools should give you endless entertainment. Making your own spawning mop. You'll need some green or brown acrylic yarn, a book taller than your breeding tank, it doesn't have to be aquarium related, a scissor and a wine cork. Acrylic yarn is safer to use in an aquarium rather than natural materials, as it holds any dye well, doesn't break down easily in the water, and is easy to disinfect. Before using the mop, soak it in hot water overnight and rinse it before putting it into the tank. After use, disinfect the mop in hot water, let it dry and store until your next breeding project. I have several different sized mops on standby for whenever I need them. Step 1. Wind the yarn around the book several times. Depending on the required thickness of the mop, 30 to 50 loops are needed. Step 2. Feed a piece of string through under the loops at the top of the book and tie a tight knot, pulling together the individual yarns. Step 3. Cut the loops at the other end by sliding a scissor between the book and the yarns. You have made a spawning mop. This mop can be used at the bottom for breeding tetra and barbs, but to make it float, tie a wine cork to the top. This will make the mop look just like the roots of marginal plants.